My name is Ben Swanepoel and I'm working for WCS as a landscape manager for the Swanepoel National Park in the country of Laos. We found that it's very seldom that there's one particular answer to a problem. And what we found is that you have to actually take a number of different components of management together before you actually get to the answer. So that's, in a nutshell, how I would explain integrated landscape management. So if I had to use an example on Swanepoel, we have a monthly meeting where we have all the different component leads, and our rangers will present the data. Okay, so we look at the data and we see that in one particular village area there's a big increase in snaring. So the law enforcement component will say we need to put another 2 teams into that area. But then the outreach component would say, but wait a minute, we haven't actually done any outreach in that area. And then the livelihood component would say, yeah, and also that village is actually a really poor village because they lost their access to this particular market. And so we realized then that, okay, so law enforcement is actually just going to create a tension within that community unless we're going to look overall at what the issues are in that area. So that's kind of an example of like applied integrated management that we do, and we do this isn't a one-off, this is done, like we do have to do this almost every day because the situations change so quickly. So on Swanepoel, obviously, quite a long time ago, we were able to identify who the main stakeholders are. And in our case, we are an advisor to government. So we very much work through the government agencies. So our first stakeholder, obviously, is the agency in Laos that is responsible for protected area management. So that in this case, this is the Department of Forestry. But what we find that even though the Department of Forestry might take decisions, it's really up to the districts, and we have 10 districts. So the district governors and the district staff and working there are really the gatekeepers of what we're actually able to get right in the community. And then once you've worked through the districts to do the work, when you get down to the village level, because we really try our best to work with communities and actually listen to communities, then it really also again comes down to what are the communities prepared to really go for within their village. And it's difficult because you have to find out what villages really are happy about and not just what villages might say at a big meeting they're happy with. So there's a difference there. So it's a long-term relationship. And then of course we also have other stakeholders like the military who are quite powerful in the areas of our protected areas because they're often very close to the borders with Cambodia or Thailand, Vietnam, etc. So we have to work with the military, and they actually can be supportive of us in helping our ranger teams, strengthening our ranger teams, and in some ways they can actually be a liability. So, but we work with the military, and then there are a number of other agencies. There are a number of private companies and NGOs also working in the area, and we have to collaborate with them to get the best results. Maybe another way of looking at it is, okay, what is our goal? As a conservation organization, our primary goal is to protect the habitat and wildlife of the protected area. I mean, that sounds obvious. Now, in the context of Laos, which is a developing country, we have 90 villages around the protected area, and that's close to 40,000 people, and they all have traditionally used the protected area to gather their basic needs in their lives. I mean, for building material, for food, for everything. Okay. Now the government has declared it a protected area. That doesn't take away the fact that those communities are still largely dependent on these protected areas. So in this case, if we really want to protect wildlife, okay, then we actually have to go away from the wildlife and go to the communities, because we found through our data that 90% of all the what we call illegal activities, so the illegal hunting, snaring, poaching, land clearing, that is done by those villagers. So if we just ignore that fact and we just focus on putting more ranger teams in the forest, we are never going to win the battle. You need to have, a country's army to protect a place as big as Swanepoel. So what we have to do, we have to look back, we have to step back, we have to go to the communities and say, what do you really need to be able to conduct your lives in a way that you can still develop and grow? And, we will have be able to fill your basic desires that we all want to do. We want to educate our children, we want to, So how do you do that within this community? And the only way you can do it is by really sitting and talking to your villagers. And so what we do is we create a kind of a buffer zone, but we call it a controlled use zone, where villagers are allowed to do activities and they determine what their boundary is with the park, and we negotiate and we eventually determine it's okay, the community still need this area, but okay, sure, they can't they can't do destructive agricultural activity. They can't do complete land clearing, but they can collect NTFPs, fish conservation zones. They can do a lot of activities in that area that are non-destructive. And so then you work with the villagers. So this involves land use planning. So now you want to save wildlife, but you're doing village land use planning. Then you're talking about what about NTFP management. So these are non-timber forest products. These are products that are not impactful on the protected area and on the habitat. So you've got to start looking at managing different kinds of plant species, or helping the villagers to better manage plant species. Okay. Obviously, you've also got your environmental education and awareness, and that's very kind of traditional conservation. But then you're also looking at things like agriculture. So we have to look and say, fine, the NTFP management, great. Land use planning has contributed something towards it, but there's still a huge need in the community for just like basic income, right? So what we did, we spoke to the villagers and we spoke to a partner, and we eventually introduced a coffee project in a number of villages in a very important biodiversity area of the protected area. Because remember, these villages are inside the protected area. And so we introduced the coffee enterprise. So it's a shade grown, so it's very climate smart and all this. Enterprise, but we worked with the villagers. Initially, they were skeptical of this new industry. They, reluctant to start looking at something new. But after a couple of years, people started really, engaging in this. And now we've got 80 households in 5 villages that are fully engaged with planting and growing coffee. And the income from the coffee is going to be so much more than the little bit that they're getting from rice and that. So in that way, okay, fine. So by doing that, we've signed conservation agreements. So everybody that's wanted to do coffee has had to sign it, because okay, fine, we won't be involved in any hunting, and there are penalties attached to this, and monitoring around this as well. So now we've got ranger teams. We've got monitoring. We've got livelihood we've got livelihood development of new activities. We've got land use planning, integrated management, and now we can start talking about an integrated approach to going back to what we were originally doing, is save the wildlife or the habitat. And so that's kind of how we look at it, and how we've realized that we need to work. We've done things in the past where we've had a program of outreach, and then we've had another program of law enforcement, and then we've decided to have a program of ecotourism. Okay, and they have had marginal success. The only time we can actually demonstrate a genuine success, and which you can actually measure, is when we put all of this together and we've worked it together, and then you can start seeing a change. So for me, I'm convinced that this is integrated is just the right approach for a protected area of this. Maybe there's other protected areas that are fenced off, like where I've come from in South Africa, where communities are not even part of the protected area, and they're so far now removed that we actually go into the community and saying, how can we involve the community in the conservation? Here it's completely the other way around. It's actually the communities themselves that are going to be creating the success or failure of the protected area, not our good deeds inside the protected area.